All right, and welcome back to another episode of Rauls World of Synths. I am Raul. This time around, we're going to be continuing our Doepfer A121 Multimode filter series, and we're going to be looking at the band and the notch filter on this particular filter. Last time we looked at the low pass and the high pass and looked at some oscilloscope views of that. This time I thought it'd be useful to kind of break it into a separate segment and take a look at some of that. So just for those of you who are joining us for the first time, just want to tell you what's going on in the patch here. We have CV input over here from our sequencer, feeding in notes into our A110, saw wave going out into the input of our multimode filter. And let's get a frame of reference here of what we're going to be dealing with. So this is going to be unfiltered. That's what it sounds like. So standard saw wave. Now, let's take a listen to, let's see, I'm going to have to take this cable out, just temporarily anyway. And then actually go into my saw wave with this red cable over here, which is my stack cable. And take my saw wave out, over into my mixer. There we go. And then I'm going to take this output and then go over to my oscilloscope so we can see what our standard saw wave looks like. So take a look at our oscilloscope. That's kind of a saw wave right there. That's kind of what we're going to be working with a little bit later. Unpatching from oscilloscope. Let's go back to our main patch over here. So that's what we're going to be working with, and that's what we're going to be filtering. Let me get a patch set up just like we had last time. So I'm taking saw out from here over into our multimode filter. And then I'm going to use our stack cable to get the rest of this patch going. So I'm going to be taking bandpass out for our first example, going into input number 1 of our A138 mixer. Now I need to feed my oscilloscope, so I'm going to take right out the back of this stack cable over into my oscilloscope. And if we keep an eye on the oscilloscope, we should be able to see it plug in there. There we go. But as you can see, it does not really have that nice distinct saw shape, even if I adjust the cutoff. And that's because of the bandpass filter that's happening right there. Right there in the middle is about where I get the closest approximation as I can to a saw wave. And that's partly to do with the way a bandpass works, which, as we said before, it kind of cuts highs and lows and then kind of just lets a small narrow band, kind of, if you look at my hand over here, kind of like almost like a hill in the center that's kind of going through the filter. So back to the example, let's have a listen just across the whole spectrum of the cutoff frequency. So right there at the bottom we have very little sound. Midway we have a sound that kind of is around there, and then at the top we have something that sounds like that. Okay, I'm going to bring it all the way down to the bottom. So let's look at our oscilloscope. That's what we got. Got about nothing. Going up to the midpoint, that's the midpoint right there. Kind of a rounded shape rather than a distinct sharp edge of our waveform. I'm going to bring it up to the top. Kind of a very small band of frequencies passing through there. So that's the bandpass example. For a cutoff, and bring this down again to about the lowest part over here at the A121. Now, let's kind of play around with resonance a little bit. So I'm going to bring resonance up to about the halfway mark. And then I'm going to bring the frequency up to about the halfway mark. And if we take a look at our oscilloscope, you can see that that's quite a distinct change there. But let's not get off track. Let's actually go back to our A121 and just listen to what's happening here. So resonance at midpoint, resonance at high point, very growly, middle. Somewhere at the top. Let's keep it at the top and then maybe bring cutoff down a little bit. There we're getting just a saw wave, or a sine wave. At the top we're getting a more kind of distinct, jagged tone. Okay, now let's hear and see what this kind of looks like. So let's take a look at our oscilloscope. We'll start at the bottom. Full resonance over at our A121 and lowest cutoff. So at our oscilloscope we see very little. And now I'm going to bring it up a little bit, about the halfway point of our frequency. If you look at the A121, now take a look at our oscilloscope and you can see our waveform is quite distorted from the original. Let's bring the frequency up a little bit. I'm going to bring it up to the top and just keep your eye on the oscilloscope. So we get a very distorted sound, very unrecognizable from the original. Now sonically you can still hear that it's there, but it looks very different than it did before. Now again, I'm back at about the halfway mark on our frequency. I'm going to bring resonance down a little bit because we've been listening to it at self-oscillation. So I'm going to bring it to the halfway mark. Let's take a look at our waveform in our oscilloscope. Now let's bring up the cutoff now and take a look at our oscilloscope. Now we remember even with no resonance we just had kind of a little peak that was kind of peeking through. And so that's still what we have. And sonically that's kind of what you hear is just a very narrow band. Right here I'm turning the resonance up if you look at the oscilloscope, and there we're getting those kind of big kind of triangles going horizontally or moving almost like arrows. And we can start to hear the self-oscillation occur. Okay. So that's the bandpass. I'm going to unpatch that. Let's go back to A121. So now let's jump up to its older brother or younger brother, depending on how you want to look at it, the notch filter. I'm going to bring my resonance all the way down. And let me bring cutoff frequency all the way down as well. And let's patch into notch. Here we go. So that's what we're hearing right now is notch at the lowest frequency. And now let's take a listen to that by going up our frequency there. Cutoff. Right there is about the midpoint. And remember, the notch filter is the opposite of bandpass, where in the bandpass we had that kind of hill shape that was passing a small band through. This one's working the opposite way, so if this were the filter, you'd have lows passing, nothing passing, and then the highs passing. So kind of more like a V or a U shape. But that's sonically what we got there, and again, that's at the midpoint, and we'll bring it up. Okay. Down to about the midpoint. A little lower than the midpoint. Let's go all the way down to the bottom. Well, let's take a look at our oscilloscope. And that's what we got going over there right now. And now I'm going to bring the frequency up to the halfway mark, so just keep your eye on the oscilloscope. And right about there we're getting our triangle wave. But then it's also a little bit distorted. It's got some extra frequencies going on there. Or distortion because of the filtering. So over at the A121 you can see I'm at the midpoint. Now I'm going to go a little bit higher, so keep your eye on the oscilloscope again. Here we go. Going up. There we're actually getting our saw wave back. Cool. So that's about the only time we've actually gotten it back, at least in this example. See a bandpass, we never really saw those edges again. So that's the frequency cutoff. Back at about the halfway mark. Now let's go down to resonance and then kind of play around a little bit with that. So I'm going to bring this up so we can hear what this sounds like. Doesn't sound very different. Let's bring it up all the way to self-oscillation. Almost providing a nice little percussive accent to this sound. So this is again at the frequency midpoint on the filter. That's what we're hearing right now. So let me bring resonance down again. And I want you to keep your eye on the oscilloscope this time. So my A121, I got resonance all the way down. Keep your eye on the oscilloscope. Right here is resonance at the halfway mark. Going a little bit higher. Keep your eye on the oscilloscope. There's kind of on and off distorting the wave. Now again, frequency is at the midpoint, so I'm going to bring that up. Keep your eye on the oscilloscope. So it's almost like it has the outline of a saw, but the peaks, or I guess the saw part of it, is more distorted now with the resonance all the way up. And of course you have lots of abilities to mix and match, like you could put resonance about there on your A121 and then play around with the cutoff. And if you look back at the oscilloscope, you have a slightly different wave shape there. And then everything in between. Now you can hear that by tweaking the cutoff, I'm getting a fairly interesting kind of sound happening here. Very formanty sounding, kind of. But at any rate, that's the notch filter. So we've talked about this time around the low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch this time. But in this last segment, we kind of focused on the filters and then what actually comes out when you look at an oscilloscope with those. In the next segment, we're going to kind of be jumping into some modulation examples of our A121. So hopefully you'll stay tuned for that, and hope that you found this useful, and it gave you some insight as to what's going on with some of these different types of filters, and helps you in your patching out there. Thank you so much for watching. Please stay tuned for the next segment, and keep on patching.